This is our recap of the Montana Dinosaur Trail trip we took recently. We started off in Ginkgo Petrified Forest in eastern Washington along the Columbia River, examining petrified trees. We then crossed the mighty Columbia and went up to the Wild Horse Monument. We climbed the steep trail up to the top to see the horses and enjoy the view from atop the hillside. Then it was onward to Idaho, where we visited the Cataldo Mission, the oldest structure in all of Idaho. The church is beautifully made, and there's a great museum down below it worth seeing. You can also tour the parish house as a museum also. Then it was off to Wallace, Idaho, and the center of the universe. We toured the town and checked it out. The old railroad station had been moved to downtown from its old location, and the museum inside is well worth the visit. We also checked out the Jameson Saloon, but unfortunately it was not open for business. We then went over 4th of July Pass, dropped down into Montana, and arrived at Lincoln's $50,000 bar, which is quite the place. It has a large gift shop, a bar, and a large restaurant, and next to it is a casino, and next to that is a large truck stop. The best thing was they had a free RV park in the back, and a few of them had free power also. This turned out to be a great place to let the dogs roam on their long leads and get a chance to stretch their legs. The next day we were on the road again, stopping off at St. Regis to exercise the dogs as we followed the rivers and the high mountain plains to Ronan, Montana, with the Mission Mountains as a beautiful backdrop to the town. Here we visited the Garden of the Rockies, a great museum with lots of information and lots of artifacts from the frontier life on Montana's plains. It also covered life around Flathead Lake in the northern part of Montana. The museum was full of all kinds of interesting items to explore. It even had an old stagecoach stop, which was moved here from its original location not far away. You're able to go inside and see what those riding the stagecoach would have enjoyed back then. Then we headed up into the mountains to Lake Mary, Ronan State Park. This campground was very clean and very nice, and we enjoyed it all, even the dogs. After a short rest, I took the dogs individually down to the lake to let them play in the water and cool off. It was a great day and a great place to camp. The next day we left the Flathead Lake area and headed north along Upper Flathead Lake to Columbia Falls and our first Harvest Host stop-off, the White Raven Winery. I did a tasting of 5 of their wines here but found nothing that I wanted to buy at this location. So I went back out to the girls in the RV. Holy cow, our first thunderstorm of the trip. It's coming down hard. Had to close up the windows and everything. Shiver me timbers. The next morning we continued on to East Glacier, where we toured the East Glacier Lodge, a fantastic place and something to see whenever you go by this area. Here's the grand lobby. The check-in desk. Kind of reminds me of Yellowstone Lodge. They have restaurants here, and they have a coffee bar. This is quite the place. East Glacier Lodge. After touring the lodge, we continued on to Browning, Montana, and toured the Museum of the Plains Indians. This is a very, very good museum and explains lots of their crafts and artwork. Then it was on to our first stop and the start of the Montana Dinosaur Trail. Here at the field station in Bynum, Montana, were fossilized skulls of strange animals, fossilized eggs, and an example of a fossil from the field frozen in time. The resident paleontologist also had her job here, uncovering a clutch of fossilized eggs which she had been working on for going on 3 years now. Then it was time to leave town and head for the hills to find our campsite for tonight. We headed up to Cave Mountain Campgrounds, following a ravine way up into the mountains along a crystal clear, beautiful river. This place was fantastic. I really loved camping here. The views and the scenery were fantastic. Our campsite was big and comfortable, and the dogs had plenty of room. That night, everybody slept really well. The next morning, driving out, we paused to see if we could catch sight of the beaver that built this magnificent dam. But I guess he was sleeping in. Our next stop was the Old Trail Museum in Choteau, Montana. Luckily, this big fella didn't give us any hassles. The museum is a combination of the county museum and a dinosaur stop. Like the stops before it, it shows dinosaurs found in this area of Montana. The next stop was Rudyard Depot Museum, another combination of a county museum and a field station dinosaur museum. It had some fascinating dinosaur fossils and exhibits, and was worth the stop. And here we are at the Blaine County Museum in Chinook, Montana, off of Highway 2. It is one of 2 museums that has background information on Montana's favorite son, Charles Russell, with his drawings and notes and letters while living in this area of Montana. Once again, the small county museum incorporated a dinosaur museum also, showing the dinosaurs found and excavated in their area. The next dinosaur stop in Malta was the Dinosaur Field Station and the Phillips County Museum, which sadly was closed when we were there. However, the grounds have some interesting dinosaurs that children and people can explore and touch. The museum itself is fantastic, with full-size skeletons of Triceratops and other monsters, and even the lower jaw of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Man, look at them babies. This site's claim to fame is a duck-billed dinosaur named Leonardo. He is in the Guinness World Book Records as the most well-preserved soft-tissue dinosaur fossil in the world. His fossil is currently on loan to Japan for research, but they have a replica of his soft-tissue body hanging on the wall. Here are some black and white photos of the late 1800s and early 20th century, showing how people would go out and collect fossils and bring them back to research stations. Then it was on to Fort Peck for our campgrounds in the land of Lewis and Clark. Fort Peck is an enormous reservoir held back by a huge earthen dam. There were several campsites to choose from. Ours was a 14-day stay right along the shore. Tired and sweaty, we decided to call it a day and went to bed. The next day, we got up and went down to the site of the next dinosaur stay. Unfortunately, it was closed because of a power outage. We looked through the front and saw a giant dinosaur in the center, so we walked around behind to gaze into the huge glass panes to see what was there. It was a giant Tyrannosaurus Rex on a pedestal. I wish I could have gone in and seen it better. That being the bust, we continued on to Glendive to the Makashaka State Park and Visitor Center. The Visitor Center had a very small dinosaur exhibit that I chose not to show. The state park is in one little area that had all these fascinating looking rocks and sediment layers. The state park has several trails going throughout the hills for you to explore the natural beauty of this land. I explored a few trails and looking at how They were. I decided not to go down them because I didn't want to have to climb back up out of them. However, I did decide to venture to the top of the walkway to see what the trail was like, and decided I could just as well enjoy the view from up on the bluff. The next day, as we were leaving the campsite, Kate got sight of a big buck out there grazing and kept her eyes on it as we drove by. Our next point was the farthest point east on the map, the town of Ekalaka, and it had a great museum. Here's a photo of the town in 1898. This museum had a lot of odd things I'd never seen before. Here's a rendering pot, and here is a fancy armadillo purse some lady once owned. And here is a safe that I doubt any safecracker could get into. And here's the entrance into the dinosaur exhibit. As you go in, you walk right into the jaws of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And here is a fossil skeleton of a duck-billed dinosaur. That thing was big. And they also had fossilized eggs and one showing a baby dinosaur inside. The big thrill for me here was a full-size fossil of an Ichthyosaurus sea serpent that swam in the shallow seas in Montana millions of years ago. We then left town and headed north, stopping at a fantastic place called Medicine Rocks. It kind of reminded me of the Flintstones bedrock in a way. There were several trails you could take going out into the prairie to explore all these odd and strange formations and see them up close. Some were several stories high. We stayed that night in Miles City at the Tongue River Winery Harvest Host. We parked under a huge tree for shade. I let the dogs out to exercise, and then I went in to taste the wines. The winemaker had been making wine since 18, and it was the only place I've ever come across where they didn't charge you for wine tasting. I think that's because he knew how great his wines were. On our way north to Jordan, we finally got a view of animals other than cows out in the field. On our next night's stay in Jordan, we were shown some real rugged Montana hospitality. Bring your own toilet paper. The next day found us out in the wilds of Montana at another harvest host at Bear Gulch Pictographs. We camped in a big field and then went on a tour that morning. The white-haired lady that was the tour guide was a walking history book of the area and the pictographs, and pointed out many on the trail to photograph. Hard to believe these cliffs were once at the bottom of a shallow sea millions of years ago. Our next stop was in the town of Harleton at the Upper Mussel Shell Museum, where we were given a personal tour of the museum by the curator himself.
Welcome to the Upper Mussel Shell Museum in Harleton, Montana. My name is Tim Busby. I'm the curator. I've been here about 3 years. Our museum is a community museum. It is part of the Upper Mussel Shell Historical Society, so it's not operated by the city or county. It is a private organization. But as we reflect the history of Mussel Shell County, from all the way from the Devonian period to modern times, it is kind of the attic for Mussel Shell County and all the inhabitants and citizens that have lived here.
Then, on our way to our next Harvest Host stay tonight, we stopped off at Big Timber, Montana, and walked the streets and had lunch in one of the cafes. It was a nice little walk and a nice little town to visit. The next thing we knew, we were in Grey Cliff, Montana, at the Grey Cliff Mill, another Harvest Host guest and a non-alcoholic place, and great for families and friends. It is a large park-like area with outer buildings also. There are the upper craft buildings and a stairway down to a root cellar that sells delicious fresh-made cheeses, spreads, dips, and other items. When we left the next morning, we crossed over under the freeway and made a short stop at the Grey Cliff Prairie Dog Town to see what the little critters were doing. Then headed for the last stop on the Dinosaur Trail, the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana. This collection of dinosaur fossils is one of the largest and most diverse known, and well worth the visit if you ever go through Montana on I-90. There are such strange things as sea serpent heads, a triceratops and its little boy, and a woolly mammoth skull and tusk, and even some weird-looking skull from an armored dinosaur. The piece de resistance, of course, is the large Tyrannosaurus Rex in the large room, overlooking all the people. Well, I hope you enjoyed the summary. I hope you will communicate with us by giving us some feedback. So, till we meet again, the girls and I wish you all the best. Take care.